Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's Musings by Martiki coming to you again today to deliver another interesting subject. This one is entitled The Concept of the Sponge. But before we get into that, I just want to take some time out to say thank you to everyone who's tuned in so far for listening to all the podcasts that I've recorded. It gives me the motivation to carry on doing the things I'm doing. Now back to today's discussion, the concept of the sponge. And I'm sure you're all wondering, why sponge? Well, it's that one household item that comes into contact with so many different surfaces. So we've got the glassware, we've got the chinaware, we've got the silverware, we've got plasticware, if that's even a word. And just like the sponge, in life we're faced with so many different scenarios. Each time comes with different reactions. Moving on. Now we're going to look at the scope of life through the sponge using three different scenarios. The first one is the sponge and the sand. I don't know what kind of sponges you use in your kitchen, but the one I have is the very common type. The yellow one that has the green pattern that's a bit rough, you know, that type? Okay, so picture that coming into contact with a heap of sand. Now you can choose different reactions of the sponge. So imagine taking a dry sponge and then putting it on a heap of sand, and then a very wet sponge and then dipping that too on a heap of sand. Imagine what the outcome will be, and that is what we're going to talk about. Your imagination and guess is as good as mine. I can picture the dried sponge shaking off the sand easily, and the wet one will have a little bit of a challenge because the sand will be more clingy towards it. Is that what you got? Because that's my imagination, and I was guessing we're all on the same page. The second scenario is the sponge and the jelly, the very wobbly jelly. Now close your eyes. Imagine picking up your sponge, the same sponge I described from the beginning, the yellow one, with a green rough pattern at the bottom. Now place this on top of your jelly. What do you imagine? I can picture myself picking up the sponge and looking at it to realize that there's no itsy bitsy piece of jelly stuck on the sponge. And then I'm looking down at the jelly and I see that the jelly is still the same, still as wobbly as it was from the very beginning. And it's had no reaction towards the sponge. They both came out clean. The third scenario is the sponge and water. I'm tempted to say don't even close your eyes to imagine this one, because just as you would have thought, the sponge is going to absorb all of the water just like a magnet attracts metal. The book of Colossians chapter 2 verse 6 to 7 states, "Therefore, as you receive Jesus Christ the Lord, so walk in him, rooted and built up in him and established in faith, just as you were taught." Like the sand, there are people who are attached to God on a short-term basis. So for example, you need something and then you call onto him to come and do it for you, and then when you're faced with the next challenge, you're easily shaken off. Remember that it's not just the dried sponge that will shake off the sand easily, but even the wet sponge, when it gets dried, the sand will easily fall off. So when you have people who just latch onto God with just a little bit of hope, and when that little bit of hope is easily shaken, or something comes in to attack that hope, they just fall off. And that's the end of the relationship. Just remember that God is not a vending machine that you just put a coin in to take out when you need whatever you take, or when you're hungry to serve that purpose and then move on. God is the fridge that you have at home. You open it and you stock it up when you're done taking out whatever you've taken out of it. You don't just take out. I don't think you'd be pleased to see your fridge at home empty. But I'm sure you can comfortably walk away from a vending machine even if it's empty. Once you get what you want out of it, you're done and you move on to the next. Now let's talk about the jelly. Just as the jelly sets in its mold, there are people who are already set in life. Just as the jelly does not allow the sponge to penetrate, there are people in life who are hardened and don't allow God to work in them, or don't even allow a relationship with God. Now let's move on to talk about the relationship between the sponge and the water. As I've already said, the main purpose of the sponge is for cleaning, and when it comes into contact with the water, something amazing happens. It cleans all of the dishes and everything starts to sparkle. So as it's stated in the book of John chapter 15 verse 7, if you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. So let's be that water that when it comes into contact with God, it's able to do amazing things. I'm not just saying clean the dishes and then leave it like that. No, I'm saying that allow God to use you to serve the purpose for which He has brought you to the world to serve. When you allow God to work in you, you realize that you're no longer dormant, but then there's a ripple effect. You start to stretch outwardly. You don't just stay there limiting yourself to serve God within your own, comfortable zone, but then you start to function and work in a bigger circle. You start to reach out. The gift that is in you moves out of you to reach other people, and that is when you know that you're no longer going with the flow, but you are the flow. Do you get me? To finalize this podcast, let's revisit our mantra. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Now, repeat this after me. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Do not forget this. Till next time, it's Musings by Martiki. Bye-bye.